Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made this cutting board for my father. Let's get started. First, let's talk about the design of the board. I wanted to make something that was both functional and beautiful. I chose a combination of cherry and purple heart for the majority of this board because they complement each other nicely. Finally, I decided to add a bit of variety and put a stripe in the middle composed of ash and walnut to contrast with the darker purple heart and cherry background. Both the purple heart and cherry were rough cuts and not particularly square. The purple heart was extremely warped, so I ended up cutting both the cherry and purple heart into smaller strips on the table saw to decrease the cutting forces during flattening, and then used the jointer to flatten one side of the purple heart prior to glue up and the planer to flatten both sides of the cherry. That way I decreased the total number of times I needed to send the purple heart under the planer and therefore decreased the chances of severely screwing something up. Processing the ash and walnut went pretty smoothly in comparison, using essentially the same techniques. I left the stripe at a higher thickness than the rest of the board to accommodate further squaring. My first glue up isn't anything special, just clamping each piece together with woodworking and C-clamps. I'm not trying to perfectly align anything here, just make sure that all the wood faces are flush. The last bit of processing I needed to do was square all of the glued parts and plane them to the same thickness. My strategy for avoiding planing issues with the purple heart mainly worked well here, save for a few burn marks which I needed to sand out later. I ran all of the parts through the planer at the same planing height, bringing them to exactly the same thickness, and then I used the jointer to square the parts and the table saw to finish cutting everything to size. My final glue up was really the most critical point of the build, as I wanted to avoid any further passes under the planer. I used a couple of T-slot gussets as cauls, mainly because I was too lazy to make them out of wood. Once the glue had dried, I removed the clamps and scraped off any excess glue, and then I sanded the board both by hand and using an orbital sander, starting at 220 grit and working my way up to 600. There was no reason to sand to a grit this high, it was purely because I couldn't find my 320 grit sandpaper and 600 was the next lowest. And then I cleaned everything off using an airbrush and then isopropyl alcohol. After cleaning off the board, I then applied a food-safe mineral oil to the board, and there you have it, a beautiful and functional cutting board. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope it remains useful for years to come. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and don't forget to subscribe for more woodworking videos. Thanks for watching.